The sword route. It's one of the strangest and most unsettling parts of Deltarune. Even though we don't permanently slaughter innocent Darkners, and we don't put Birdly back into a coma or force a thorn ring on Noelle's finger and steal away her date with Susie, playing this series of bonus games in the dilapidated S-rank changing room will leave you feeling uncomfortable and struggling to find the words to describe why. Well, in this Halloween special, I intend to find those words and make sense of Deltarune Chapter 3's totally unnerving secret route. Hi there everyone, Lars here from Camille's Harem, a channel for novice authors by novice authors, because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. And I saw this video by Pastra a little while back that delved into why he found the sword route so spooky to play. He brought up loads of great information and insights, and I feel like I can add onto that by bringing a storyteller's perspective. First off, in order to make sense of what's going on in this hidden route, we need to understand that the sword route itself is a self-contained horror story. At the same time, it holds a place in the larger mystery and plot unfolding just behind the Fun Gang's main adventures. This includes, but is not limited to, the identity of the Roaring Knight, the motivations of demons like Friend, the themes and concept of freedom in Deltarune, and the steady march towards Angel's Heaven. Several important things that we have to acknowledge about every good horror story on top of this is that there are set rules in place that cause the awfulness to begin. We and the characters usually don't know what those rules are until it's too late, and this is especially a hallmark of Japanese horror stories. And for everyone who has played Toby Fox's games, the Japanese influences are readily and very apparent. So what this means for us is that we are supposed to be in the dark on a lot of what's happening. That uncertainty heightens the tension and anxiety that we feel and makes us worried that our choices during the sword route might bring about really bad unforeseen consequences, especially when we get to forcing Chris to murder their friends in the third level. However, once we get to Chapter 4, more of the sword route's place in the story does come to light, but we are still kept largely in the dark, thereby preserving the mysteries and subtle horrors within the S-rank changing rooms. Next, we need to address the context for the sword route, and it starts with Chris opening the Dark Fountain and giving life to this particular dark world. And what we learn in Chapter 4 is that the dark worlds reflect to a certain degree the one who opened their respective fountains. This works really well for Chris in so many ways. The TV land is full of references to their younger days, with Azrael, Des, and their parents. And the entire map from beginning to end is probably the most railroaded of any of the chapters in Deltarune thus far, conveying how Chris feels completely without options while pressing ahead. And behind all the glitz and glam of tennis sets, it's all rotting and vandalized, portraying a representation of the facade Chris is forced to wear and how they feel about their part in everything that's going on. Which, when you realize this, makes the scenes in Chapter 4 when Chris feels reassured by Susie's presence just so much sweeter. Just to throw this out here as well, just a real quick tangent. It's a good tactic in horror storytelling to have moments of levity or heartfelt scenes that help to ease off the tension, and this causes the narrative to actually flow really well and also helps to heighten the stakes, the personal stakes for the characters, and endear the audience more to the cast of characters. So that's just something to bear in mind if you're writing your own horror stories. Now, we know thanks to Chris's run-in with Spamton and trying to find a way to get their own freedom, that they want to sever the control that is being exercised over them. And I speculated in my video about Des as the Roaring Knight that Chris might even be researching a way to free her body from the control that some malignant ancient entity is exercising over her. Check out my video to learn more about that. But all of this is to say that it stands to very strong reasoning that a dark world opened up by Chris Dreamer would include a chance to further explore this potential freedom. The freedom from control from others, and not just the control of the player. However, that possibility is entirely hijacked by a demonic figure that the community has taken to calling ERAM. Finally, to set the stage for truly making sense of the sword route, we need to address its immediate narrative purpose. We need to get the Shadow Mantle, and the sword route is how you get it. This possibility was introduced to us by Sham, who offered to make us something to confront our fate and the greater threats coming over the horizon. However, the Shadow Mantle presumably went missing at the end of our fight with King back in Chapter 1. It flew off of its own accord and was hidden by ERAM, who uses it to taunt Chris and the player, knowing full well about the horrible fight against the Roaring Knight that is yet to come at the end of Chapter 3. The Shadow Mantle itself is not essential, though, to moving the story along, at least not at this point, but it serves a purpose in making it possible for the Fun Gang to keep collecting all the shadow crystals that they possibly can before they confront the end of the prophecy, which overall controls their adventures leading up to Angel's Heaven. Now that we know that the sword route is a self-contained horror story created around Chris's desire for freedom, in which they and the player are both taunted with acquiring a powerful item, we are ready to assess why the heck this creepy backdoor Legend of Zelda knockoff is so dang spooky. The sword route can only be accessed by achieving the S rank, Z rank, or buying your way into the back for the first round of Tenna's games. Hence the rules. Already got to obey the rules. It's quickly apparent that Tenna really doesn't want anyone in the Fun Gang to go back there. But if they do, hopefully they have been having just so much fun that they won't mind how cruddy and overwhelmingly awful it is back there. Furthermore, Rules Card's presence immediately makes everyone think that this is just a bad joke. But for good measure, Tenna has sabotaged the game console. And this is where the horror starts picking up. The strange character named Ram, who claims to know Chris way earlier on, encourages Chris to go further into the back and play the real game that Tenna's been keeping secret. This peculiar Darkner is eager to help Chris experience fun and freedom through games. But the fact that we cannot respond to him gives us no insights into how Chris feels towards this particular Darkner, a Darkner with whom they're supposed to have a long history with. We are intentionally kept in the dark, which becomes all too common throughout this route. When we try to play the game, Tenna's sabotage is revealed. However, someone leaves for Chris and us a controller that is eerily colored the same as Spamton's glasses, and the shading giving to Friend, the cat-like demon who has been quietly and unexpectedly haunting us throughout the game. Once we make Chris plug in the strange controller, we are sent into a rather bland game where we have to just cut our way through once peaceful monsters in order to acquire greater power merely through slaughtering them. We even get to cut down a certain blue bird. Oh, poor Birdly. This power that we acquire through slaughtering all of these innocent monsters and Chris's one-time rival, now somewhat friend in class, allows us to break through the game's borders in a mocking sense of freedom in order to find the Ice Key. And if you poke around and explore a little, you can catch a glimpse of ERAM as he promises that we'll meet soon. This becomes relevant if, once more, you earn the S or Z rank, or again, buy your way into the back room. And in the second level of the game, it takes on a much more malevolent form as we again slaughter monsters to gain more power, and then make our way to the Arctic North, where we use the Ice Key to gain entrance to a castle full of monsters and puzzles. The goal here is to acquire an Ice Mage, who is eerily reminiscent of Noelle, and once more commit genocide! And again, we get to massacre Birdly. This poor little blue bird. Once we're through, we lead Chris and Noelle to a gate with demon horns similar to Chris's old monster horns that they used to wear. There, Noelle and Chris are both used up to open the way to the third and final level. But before we go back to the third and final level of the sword route, Chris meets up with Ram, who is in the process of being petrified. This is where players should already start growing very suspicious of what is going on, because now it suddenly seems as though the rules have been broken, or maybe we didn't fully understand the rules of Darkners in the Dark World, especially being outside of their Dark World this whole time. Because Rules and Lancer are still walking around fine and pretty, while one of the Zappers has already turned to stone. in Chris's own house. Something strange is going on, and it gets even weirder as Ram sets the stage for Eram's final taunt, bringing up how he's just simply helping Chris, even now in his sorry, pitiful, tortured state, and as the TV world itself is dying in dust and dusk, to make sure that Chris can enjoy their final game and fun and have a little freedom? Something's just not right here. And the third level at the opening requires Chris to kill Susie and Ralsei in order to proceed to a manhole where they crawl through to enter a true dungeon full of monsters, even more traps and puzzles. And we as the player are continuously compelling Chris to once more hack, slash, and stab their way through even more monsters, slaughtering an entire room full of them as they refuse to attack, all to gain the power necessary to cleave the way through the final barrier to Eram. Blood-soaked, we continue on. Battling Eram, though, is pretty straightforward, though it's a very different fight from every other boss encounter that we've had thus far. Here we have full freedom of movement, at least within a certain area, but we have no access to items or actions, meaning that we're actually a little less empowered than we ever have been before. And Eram laughs and squeals with delight as he streaks across the board and literally and figuratively turning up the heat to force Chris to play and fight like a maniac. When Eram is finally defeated, he snickers at Chris as that this has just all been about making Chris remember the freedom and fun that they had once upon a time while fighting and slaughtering other creatures. In earlier Dark World adventures, this means that Chris was doing something that was far darker, far more sinister, a past that we, the player, are not a part of. Eram is reminding Chris that without this kind of violence, the blade grows dull. We're missing a very important message here. Now, stop the presses, stop the presses. This is all well and good and interesting, but scary, unnerving, weird, creepy? Come on, Lars. This is a Halloween special and analysis, yet everything that I'm covering here just reads as a lazy creepypasta fanfic masquerading as a Legend of Zelda knockoff, right? No, because here is the horror. The game is tantalizing us with glimpses into a darker past. In my previous video about Des being the Roaring Knight, I speculated that the kids, namely Des, Chris, Azrael, and Noelle, went into the forest following the demon's tale as the prophecy describes, because they believed they could handle it. Eram teases Chris with this knowledge, recalling this time when Chris, on these previous adventures, cut loose and was so wild and free and powerful. And they fought their way through the dark worlds in the past rather than make friends with everyone that was there, which stands at odds with how Chris is now making friends with Susie, Ralsei, Lancer, and the others, while trying to protect Noelle and save Des. In effect, Chris is being haunted and tortured by their past actions and mistakes. Furthermore, Chris is forced in their pursuit for greater power in order to save everyone that they have to then kill their friends in the game. They are forced to repeatedly brutalize a representation of Birdley, almost like a victim's weird fantasy of getting revenge on their bully, which is contradictory to how Chris treats Birdley outside of the weird route. Furthermore, Chris is compelled to revisit their childhood through Tenna and the demon-horned gate within the game. They just cannot escape Carol's plan either, as they are forced to take control of Noelle in the sword route and heartlessly, wordlessly use her up until they themselves are devoured by this quest. And this is all before we as the player force them to confront the shelter, a standing symbol of their past misdeeds and the horrible situation that they are trying to get themselves out of. This torment is compounded by what we learn from Gerson about the story of the Lord's Hammer in Chapter 4. His series informed the game Dragon Blazers, which in turn inspired the knockoff that we are playing in the sword route. And from the old man himself, we learn how the story was supposed to play out. The first chapter, The March of the Dark King, was where the evil monarch is supposed to be defeated and a dragon is stopped. And then the heroes pass on to the City of Shining and save the Queen in a battle of chariots, and their next journey takes them to the Isles of Northern Lights, where they catch a glimpse of a forgotten realm. Chapter 3, the same chapter that we are in during the sword route. However, Chris's journey, and by extent our own, have been wildly different. We defeated King, sure, but we befriended the dragon. Furthermore, we only indirectly saved Queen in Chapter 2 by stopping her folly. But the chariot battle gave way to a mecha throwdown against her, not against some other entity that we had to fight in order to save the Queen. And TV Land only lightly uses the Isle of Northern Lights because Tenna is on a budget and is more concerned with preserving his place in Chris's life and restoring their family rather than going along with the script. The game and the plot have been out of whack the very moment Susie and Chris went together into the Dark World. Even if the prophecy is marching resolutely along, things are going about in a slightly different way. And that's because, as I argued when looking at Dessa's The Roaring Knight, the demons involved, from Eram to Friend, and maybe even more beyond that, such as the star that fell from the heavens, and so much more, are probably working to ensure that no matter what, everything goes according to plan until Angel's Heaven happens. And this game that Ram presses Chris to play in the back room is representative of that. Chris has gone off script, so they are forced to finally play according to the rules and the plot that has been laid out for them. There is no escaping it unless Chris wants to get thrashed by the Roaring Knight and continue to be pulled along by the player. But even in their quest for freedom from us and from the other entities that abound within Deltarune, they are still toyed with and led around as a poor puppy on a chain. There's just no escape. And for the player, it doesn't get much better. For one thing, if you've tried to avoid the weird route, you are forced to play it in the sword route. And I remember for myself how icky and disturbed I felt when I first killed Susie and Ralsei. It made me squirm a little, even as I laughed nervously to beat down Birdley twice by proxy. And honestly, I was creeped out to control Noelle and use her until she was nothing. I can imagine it was the same for many other players. Well, please let me know your experiences down in the comments. And it's disturbing because, well, these characters, we've become friends with them, and more on that in just a moment. But what about those folks, though, who have not played any of the secret bosses and haven't tried out the sword route? They're also haunted by this optional course because of the confrontation you are forced to have with the Roaring Knight at the end of Chapter 3. Once you know that there is a way to endure in that battle, where you might even learn more about these characters, the sword route teases and beckons you to take it, or else be tormented by the fact that there's so much more to the story that you will never have. Speaking of which, the sword route dumps such an unpleasant hint about Chris's past, how they enjoyed fighting and taking on monsters really also casts them into a different light. We are confronted by the fact that we know so little about them, and this sets up the reveals in Chapter 4 for just how dexterous, agile, and cunning Chris can be when they tear out the player's soul. They might not be physically strong, but those gamer reflexes and coldness that were hinted at back in Chapter 2, and what the newsletters finally reveal about Chris, all come to the forefront in this chapter, in the sword route. On top of that, Chris is clearly more capable than we previously thought, and is executing their own plan, which we are kept in the dark about despite being the ones who erroneously control them. Now, coming back to a previous point real quick, attacking innocent monsters, but especially hurting characters like Suze, Ralsei, Birdley, and Noelle, it's meant to be incredibly uncomfortable for the player. Toby has spent 2 excellent chapters to this point, and then some with Chapter 3, to help us develop relationships with all these characters, thanks to our ability to control Chris. Through that avatar, we have made just all kinds of unique friendships, and we've experienced so many things. Remember, we've even signed a waiver and contract at the beginning of the game concerning this fact, that we would experience the world through our vessel, Chris. As far as Toby Fox is concerned, we are literally in this game. This is significantly different from Undertale, which served as a mirror about what kind of gamer and person you are. But he wanted to do something different with Deltarune, knowing that everyone was going to compare it to Undertale. So rather than serve as a mirror to what kind of gamer you are, Deltarune instead makes you evaluate what kind of friend you are. And then the sword route forces you to plunge a blade through all of that. And if you don't believe me, just consider what Toby does by having Chris swap places with Mini Chris when they actually go into the game and interact with it. We, as the players, are doing the exact same thing, just less physically so. These points are all brought together so poignantly in the third level of the Sword Route, with Ram and Eram's lore drops about Chris, the pain of going through killing our friends, and being forced to commit mass murder and fight with reckless abandon, all to achieve an item, in items whose full potential we don't even get to use in chapters 3 and 4. What you start to realize upon reflection is that we are willing to subject ourselves in the Sword Route to a torturous, haunting, and slasher fest with so little payoff. Add to that all the unnerving music, or lack thereof, Friend's presence, Eram's mysterious identity and motives, the color motifs, and so much more. No wonder Pastra found this route so insanely creepy and horrifying. But there's one last thing to point out that really speaks to the heart of why the Sword Route matters, and it provides the heart and levity needed to counter the horror, thereby lifting both elements at the same time. Just after Chris has survived their harrowing experience against Eram, got scared by Mini Chris coming out of the game, and then stepping into the screen to retrieve the Shadow Mantle, Susie checks in on them. This is when we can take control of Mini Chris once again and take a stab at Susie, prompting Chris to pull her out of the way and save her. But this isn't mandatory. However, either way, Susie coming back and checking in on Chris, but especially if Chris saves her, illustrates two powerful things. First, Susie and Chris's friendship is real. And second, Chris has the power to save the people they care about. Even in the face of all this horror and demons manipulating the story and its people to ensure their preferred outcome, there is still goodness in the world of Deltarune. And despite what Eram tries to impress through the harrowing journey of the Sword Route, choices do matter, if even just at the very end of the tale. And we see that at the end of chapter 4, that goodness, that those friendships that we've built, and real freedom, as Susie learns from Gerson, are all the things needed to go to war with the demons and the prophecy. This is why the Sword Route is such a good horror story, because it not only frightens and disturbs you, but does what every good horror story has attempted to do since the first time humans shared ghost stories around the campfire, to impress upon the audience valuable lessons. As Deltarune goes on, I have a feeling that we'll end up coming back to this route and reevaluating it as we learn more about Chris, their past, Eram, and the Weird Route. There's still many mysteries to uncover, which is also something that a good horror story does, never showing its full hand until the time is right. Alright, with all that said, it's time for me to get ready for trick-or-treating. I hope that you all enjoy a wonderful Halloween, and please share with me your thoughts on the Sword Route in the comments. If you'd like to put something other than a rock in my candy bag, please check out the books I have published and buy a copy. Links for them are in the description below. Thank you so much for joining me on this spooky adventure that we call writing, and until the next video, y'all, choose.